I've been listening to Neutral Milk Hotels in the Airplane Over the Sea as per my summer tradition. Something about this music just reminds me of a blooming carnival and life in the sun. But why is that exactly? This is a question I set out to answer when building my personal curriculum, a little trended in mind hopping. But before even getting a fraction of the way in, I was met with piles of information I had known nothing about prior, and I've become even more enamored with the essence of this carnival, summertime, penny arcade, turn of the century circus that seems so elusive in my mind. Before I even begin talking, I want to note that I'm a dropout and I'm not a literary or history expert. Just an undereducated person with an interest in music and carnivals. So feel free to criticize, hiss, and correct me. I'll probably get a lot wrong or at least some details askew. So back to Neutral Milk Hotel, a band that is pretty much a staple for any hipster household, and also my favorite band. Their album, In the Airplane Over the Sea, released in 1998, is something notably special in the public opinion, a 10 out of 10 Pitchfork rating and a cult following. I'm sure we all know the context of the album, but for a brief summary, the lead vocalist, Jeff Mangum, had read Anne Frank's diary after the recording of his previous album. Being moved by her story and also moved by the dreams he had of Anne, she influenced the songs in the Airplane Over the Sea. Most notably, the third track, by the same name as the album, it proclaims Anna's ghost all around. But of course, the true meaning of certain lyrics are only known by the artists themselves, if they're lucky. See, Neutral Milk Hotel isn't really my focus here today. My focus is more about what gives me such a circusy feeling when I listen to their music, and how the hell that feeling is even significant to me to begin with. This can be traced back to two things: memory, or history to be more exact, and the carnival sense of the world. I'm going to talk about memory first, through the lens of tragedies and our own personal connections to history. Post-memory, as defined by postmemory.net, describes the relationship that the generation after bears the personal, collective, and cultural trauma of those who came before to experience they remember only by means of stories, images, and behaviors among which they grew up. But these experiences were transmitted to them so deeply and effectively as to seem to constitute memories in their own right. Post memory's connections to the past is thus actually mediated not by recall but by imaginative investment, projection, and creation. To grow up with overwhelming inherited memories, to be dominated by narratives that precedes one's birth or one's consciousness, is to risk having one's own life story displaced, even evacuated, by our ancestors. It is to be shaped, however indirectly, by traumatic fragments of events that still defy narrative reconstruction and exceed comprehension. These events happen in the past, but their effects continue in the present. To kind of sum up that quote, this term is usually more relevant when speaking about things like childhood Holocaust survivors, but I think the core concept is worth noting when engaging in any form of history through a compassionate lens. See, part of what made In the Airplane Over the Sea so special was this invitation to witness that deep and personal feeling that Mangum was experiencing. It invited us all to take part in this post-memory essence, where we peeked into the Anne Frank nightmares and visions of history that were too obscured to be accurate to reality. This essence of the past becomes deeply personal when the phenomenon of post memory arises because we cannot truly recall any events predating our own existence. Our imagination takes that role. It bridges the gap between past and present. I notice this often online with pop historians when looking for a clickbait title for their short form content, which is something I don't particularly like, but the concept is still there. We feel pity for the animals that died during mass extinction events. We feel a strong connection of girlhood with female Neanderthals. We feel solidarity with queer joy and resistance from decades and decades past, because our imagination conjures up narratives of these events and people that will bring our memories close to us with a sharpness. It feels hard to pin down such a notion because it is hard to pin down, because post-memory engaging with history transcends the linear movement of time. Time becomes a back burner notion when you feel so intimately close with history, even though it's something you, by definition, have not experienced. There is no recall of your senses or memory in that moment in time because you simply weren't there. Which brings me to my next topic, the carnival sense of the world. This is an even harder topic for me to pin down, but I'll try my best. Carnivalesque is described as a literary concept that was coined by Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian philosopher. It encompasses the events where normal hierarchies are suspended and inverted, where fools are crowned and everyone is united when faces are obscured by masks. Noted in the medieval Carnival celebration before Lent. There's a Substack article that I will link that I believe does a much better job at explaining this concept and its relation to things like the human body and collectivity. But for what it's worth, I believe this is the very essence of what makes me feel so circusy when I hear In the Airplane Over the Sea. As a paper that I will also link has stated, the carnival opens possibilities that the quotidian world or the existing order would foreclose upon. Mangum seems to need the carnival in order to effect the historical opening that would unite him with Anne Frank. There is perhaps no other way for Mangum to save the dead than through the renewing and reviving powers of the carnival. In this sense, the carnival or the circus is almost a requisite setting for the consummation for which Mangum wishes. It is a setting that teems with life, one that tries to overcome death and false distances that death would arbitrate and enforce. The carnival's sense of the world functions on four pillars of familiar and free interactions between people, eccentricity, carnivalistic mésalliance, and profanation. As the quote makes it clear, the carnival is outside of your normal perception of time, just as post memory is. To shed some light, I'd like to note that the concept of a medieval carnival is very different from a turn of the century circus. You could easily say that with the family friendly rebrand, the American circus has no carnival sense of the world at all now. But I don't wish to give you a history lesson on circus culture. But I do want to make it clear what draws us into these events and the industry of amusement. It is our senses. The carnival, and later the circus, is a deeply sensual experience. Despite an often Puritan view of the body and life during the height of circuses and medieval carnival, these amusements are deeply sensual. They ignite the senses with indulgent food, alcohol, sexually suggestive themes, and the participation and leveling of each mortal being via the right to hiss, as noted in an article about Dan Rice. These themes of mortality and body grotesque hone in on your senses of your own body and life. The same way people were united beyond class in a medieval carnival, people were also unified in the terror of a roller coaster or the laughter from a pantomime theater in a hot tent in the summer while traveling to see the circus. The smell and sights of a traveling circus are what make them so deeply intimate and personal. I believe that a circus can embody the carnival sense of the world while also making one feel similar effects of post memory. The traveling circus becomes a time outside of your normal perception of time. It becomes its own plane of being, where death and politicians and seriousness is laughed at and mocked, where the audience is infused in the performance, where a dissociation between one's body and mortality cannot exist. Of course, this is only an idea. The truth is that, while these themes do permeate through the turn of the century circus, they are often followed with themes of exploitation, which can be found throughout most of American history. Freak shows, although they do shed a light on one's body and mortality, also create a hierarchy that is not seen in the carnival sense of the world. Minstrelsy and indigenous mockery also create painful realities of pain and human suffering that cannot be denied. I have noticed an obvious switch between such practices in contemporary circus, but only through the burying and erasing of such history. I think that even this freakishness status is noted in the Airplane Over the Sea with the lyricism related to the two-headed boy. In the end, the circus is something outside of time, an amusement where death and one's bodily existence can be laughed about. We scare ourselves with roller coasters and haunted hay rides to remind our senses of what it's like to be alive. We hiss and gasp and cry out in a big top as a way to be a part of the collective and unified humanity.